Well, the time is just gone 12 minutes past 9 as we continue with the second half of the broadcast this morning. Now, this interview that we are going to have is a serious matter of concern for each and every one of us in South Africa. And we're talking about the crime index. Now, according to the 2023 Global Organized Crime Index that was released on Tuesday, it shows that South Africa scores 7.18 criminality score out of 10. 71.8%. Now, this is the seventh highest in the world out of a total of 193 countries, and the third in Africa, where South Africa is now at unacceptable high levels of crime in this country. And according to this global report, South Africa's crime networks, often fueled by corrupt relationships, have entrenched the criminal economy deeply within the country, leading to a crisis of trust in government and law enforcement. And to unpack all of this, we're joined by organized crime expert Chad Thomas. Chad, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
A very good morning to you and the viewers.
Obviously, this global report, the revelations of this global report, tells us a lot about South Africa, a hotbed for various organized criminal activities, drug trafficking, cash in transit operations. We see just so much robberies, a lot more, and all of this run by mafia style groups in this country.
It's very disconcerting when one looks at the countries that we now share this terrible reputation with. We're looking at countries such as Mexico, countries such as Colombia. We've seen those countries over the years go from functioning democracies to narco states where kidnapping became endemic, and all these different mafia and type cartels established themselves. For me, what's concerning is the comparison in the African context. We, the third worst on the African context, and those that fared worse than us in the study, being the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria, are two countries that effectively have major problems in terms of internal stability and civil war. If you look at Congo to the east of the country in Goma, they've had a civil war raging for close to 2 decades. When one looks at Nigeria in the north, you have Boko Haram waging war, and in the south you have men waging war, and in the middle there's an ongoing fight for the oil resources. So these countries are basically at war within their own countries. So you're comparing South Africa as a country that doesn't have civil war, but has a far higher murder count and death than most war zones within the continent and in the world at large. And this is of grave concern to us because it shows that the South African criminality is very violent in comparison to other emerging economies or new democracies. And the comparison is more along the lines of Mexico and Colombia, where we've seen organized crime take root.
Yes. Also, Jed, what this index is actually telling us, or what the study is actually telling us, is how violent these crimes are. And you mentioned this. And if we look at just certain examples, the disruptions of construction sites, I mean, that is just one aspect. But there are many, many others over a period of time. You know, we've just come out of this whole incident in Marshalltown with the fire, the whole question surrounding hijacked buildings, all of this that is actually playing out right under our noses now. These are crimes that we've never heard of before in this country.
Well, we're very fortunate that we've got a very active citizenry and that we have a very large contingent of private security officers that make up most probably one of the biggest private security sectors in the world. It's a sad indictment on a country when the single biggest employer in the private sector happens to be the security industry. It replaced mining a very long time ago. And you made mention of hijacked buildings. We talk about taxi mafia. We talk about construction cartels. We talk about the long distance haulage, be it of transportation of human beings, where buses are being attacked. And we're talking about buses that are being burnt out because they are encroaching on routes that people believe belong to them. Organized crime in South Africa has become very arrogant. If people want to start construction, they get introduced to what's known as business forums, and these business forums basically come there for protection fees. There's no difference with those protection rackets that have been running by these so-called business forums at construction sites to the mafia in America in the late 70s, early 80s, where you couldn't build a building in New York City without looking after the mafia. The mafia effectively controlled the labor and they effectively controlled the supply of cement. So it's a very, very concerning issue when one sees just how widespread these so-called mafias have become. When one looks at trucks that are getting burnt and how different routes are getting barricaded and the sabotage of our rail infrastructure. A lot of people think that the sabotage of the rail infrastructure is mostly because of the scrap metal value. It's not. It's so that they can continue using trucks on our main arterial routes. And those trucks themselves are now becoming targeted by different mafia groups that want to have their drivers employed by those specific companies. So companies are being forced to hire laborers on construction sites. They may not even pitch for work, but they have to pay for them anyway. They're being forced to hire drivers that they have no knowledge of. People are having to change their routes because they're encroaching in routes that belong to so-called taxi organizations. People are getting killed in the crossfire. We're now seeing trucks being targeted, carrying bread, carrying milk. And sadly, it looks like there's a free for all in respect of the different criminalities that we see playing out in South Africa.
Yes, Chad, I'd just like to spend a few minutes talking about foreign criminal actors because we know South Africa has opened up to the rest of the world, and we've got many people from across both the African continent and also other parts around the world, and many, many foreign criminal players are playing out this game in this country.
There's no doubt about that. When one looks at the kidnapping, for example, this was an imported style of kidnapping. We always had kidnapping in South Africa, but it wasn't kidnapped for ransom. We saw people being kidnapped during the commission of a hijacking of a car to see whether there was a disabling device or tracking device. We saw people being held hostage for the period before midnight and after midnight so that their money could be drawn from their account 2 days in a row. But we never saw kidnap for ransom reach the proportions that it has until it was imported from Maputo. Maputo had a sad history of kidnapping, and unfortunately, it trickled over into South Africa, where very sophisticated and organized groups started kidnapping in specific communities, specifically for businessmen or their families, high net worth individuals or individuals that had businesses that dealt in cash. Their intelligence was excellent. And we're now sitting with a situation where we've got a lot of copycat kidnapping syndicates in South Africa. We're hearing of children being taken in informal settlements and the parents being held to ransom for a couple of R100. We're hearing of middle-class people where their children or their family are being held for a couple of thousands of rands. And then, of course, we're hearing about businessmen or their families being taken for millions, if not tens of millions of rands. What we can say, however, is that the state seems to be taking this very seriously now. If we look at this current operation that's taking place, Shanella, there's been a lot of success in terms of breaking the back of certain kidnapping syndicates, cash in transit syndicates, and murder for hire syndicates. But it's not enough. But it's also not too late. The police have the support of communities. They have the support of the private security industry. They have the support of the SANDF. And if they start taking the fight against crime very seriously and allow intelligence-led investigations to take the lead, we can start turning the tide. It just comes down to how the budget is allocated. We can't have vanity projects like we saw with Lesufi, where he creates these security wardens for R500 million, and these guys don't have the necessary skills or expertise. We can't have Becky Chele putting more boots on the ground, but forgetting about the fact that the more arrests mean the more investigations. And if you don't have investigators who are seasoned, you have a skill deficit. And we haven't seen seasoned investigators who have left the police service being replaced. We know that the Hawks don't get the correct budget. They only get half of what's actually required for them to function at full capacity. That means that their members are sitting with at the low end double the amount of dockets they should be investigating. So you have dedicated members, you have the legislation in place, but the police force is disorganized as a result of these budget constraints. And when you have a disorganized police force and you don't have the correct direction from leadership in respect of how budget should be allocated, organized crime will flourish in that disorganized state.
Yes, but also, Ched, we've come with a history of corruption, and this is between state actors, the criminal organizations, as the article makes mention of. And at the end of the day, we find that there's just so much that one can actually talk about in this on this particular aspect with regard to the corruption, and also looking at just generally our political system in terms of managing all these crimes. We have certainly got a serious problem.
Of course we do. They say a fish rots from the head down. When you've got low hanging criminals seeing that the guys at the very top are getting away with it, these guys are going to increase. They're going to become far more active. In a country where there are no consequences and no accountability for politicians who are involved in anything that is untoward, or businessmen who are not held accountable for anything that is untoward, what's going to stop the guys at the bottom from saying, well, if they can get away with it, so can I?
Well, definitely. And, when we're talking about imported crimes, we've seen so much by way of countries that have specifically been mentioned in this article that we speak about. We're talking about countries like Pakistan, we're talking of Israel, we're talking of European nations, we're talking of South Americans, Chinese, right across the entire world, that they all have basically come into this country and they've seen the opportunity to make this country a haven of crime.
You're not wrong. We have a massive crime problem, and we're now importing criminals. We've seen the worst of the worst coming to South Africa from the countries that you've mentioned. We have a lot of Eastern Bloc, European type mafia operations in South Africa that are using South Africa as a springboard to export product, illicit product that is into other countries. So, for example, we see a lot of cocaine coming into South Africa. South Africa acts as a transshipment point. From South Africa, it goes to countries such as Australia. From Pakistan, we're seeing heroin coming via Lahore. It goes through to Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam goes down to Mozambique, comes through South Africa, gets repackaged, Witbank, Pretoria, and again, transshipment point gets shipped overseas. So it would seem that our infrastructure, our logistics capabilities, although it should be doing good for our country, is also being exploited tremendously by these international syndicates. And then, of course, there's the crimes that they're committing in our backyard. There's a lot of assassinations taking place between rival mafia groups from around the world. We've seen it in Cape Town with the Bulgarians. We've seen it in Johannesburg with the Serbians. We've seen it with the Israelis. And it's becoming a massive problem within the context of the fact that South Africa is seen as a state where the chances of you getting away with a crime are far better than another country. And we have the infrastructure. And of course, we have a good way of life. If you come into this country as a mafia don and you're a moneyed individual, you can live La Vida Loca in Cape Town while calling the shots.
Well, definitely. And all of this obviously leads to the big problem that we faced with in terms of the flow of funds in and out of the country. And we know that there are a lot of illicit, illegal funds that are flowing out of the country, money laundering, because this is what all these criminal mafia or these syndicates are obviously taking advantage of as well, laundering money in and out of country, all as a result of these criminal activities that they carry out in this country.
Hence the reason why the Edwin Group, together with FATF, have grey listed us. And to get off that grey list is not going to be easy. We're seeing a lot of amendments to acts to ensure that we have the necessary legislation in place to try get off the grey list and fight money laundering and fight the proceeds of crime and those who benefit from it. But it comes down to the fact that we don't have capacity and resource. We have the legislation. South Africa has some of the best legislation in the world. We also have dedicated members of both the National Prosecuting Authority as well as the South African Police Services. But it's budget. When it comes to budget constraints and the way those funds are allocated, you're basically handcuffing the very people that are meant to be fighting this. And I can just imagine how frustrating it must be to be a complex crime investigator with either SAPS or the Hawks, or a prosecutor with the NPA, and not having the resources. We must understand there are not enough investigating officers, there are not enough prosecutors, there are not enough court days, courtrooms, and presiding officers to deal with the current amount of crime. That's why we're not seeing enough dockets being enrolled. We need to seriously think about how we're going to capacitate our criminal justice cluster in order to fight back effectively.
Yes, Chad. And just finally, where does this leave people like yourself and myself, public trust, and the ability or the inability of the government to tackle these issues?
at an all-time low, and we're going to see a lot of perceived successes, a lot more roadblocks, simply because we're in an election cycle. 2024 is an election year. We're in that election cycle, and as part of the electioneering, we're going to see a lot of token cases being taken through the criminal justice system quite quickly. We hope that that momentum stays after the election, but people must always bear in mind that during the election cycle, that the public need to be in some way reassured that the government of the day is taking care of them.
Well, Chad, we're going to have to leave it at that. As always, we do appreciate your time with us right here on Salam Media. Thank you for talking to us this morning. All the best to you.
Thank you so very much.
Chet Thomas with us this morning, organized crime expert. And with that, we're going to go for a break. We come back. We'll be taking a look at the Bella Bill and how it impacts on education.